Welcome to my second program of Voices for Justice. I'm Sharon Recusson, and today on our show are two people, activists from United Valley Interfaith Project. To my left is Rod Wendt, president of UVIP, United Valley Interfaith Project, and Leah Torrey, the executive director. And I welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for coming and preparing. We've done a lot of preparation.
Great to be here.
Leah,
thank you, Sharon.
Great. Leah and Rod, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about UVIP and why you're here?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Sharon. So UVIP is a coalition of mostly faith-based groups. There are 16 of us, but we have come together to work together to create social change. In the beginning, it was mostly faith-based groups, but honestly, the topics that we've been taking on lately, the challenges that we've been facing, have brought people from across the community, whether they have a faith or no faith, together to create real social change. And we want to talk to you about one of those issues today. We're working really hard to create a moral economy, starting with the living wage. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about why?
Please.
Great.
Please do.
I'd love to.
I think everyone would like to know.
So we always start our work by listening in the community. We never want to presume to take on a topic that we assume might be a problem for people, only to find out that people aren't experiencing what our assumptions are. So we do a lot of deep listening at the beginning of any campaign we take on. And we've been listening to so many stories lately that have really touched me with some despair. Just so many stories of suffering in the community, stories of people struggling financially. You know, one story we hear again and again, as you know, this area, the Upper Valley in particular, people are aging. A lot of seniors live here, but that hasn't meant retirement for a lot of seniors. It's really meant a lot of seniors who have worked hard their whole lives, have lived sort of paycheck to paycheck, have provided a great service to their family, but now that they're in their 60s and 70s, they can't afford to retire, so they continue to work. They're 65 and working, they're 70 and working, they're 75 and working, they're 80 and working, and retirement just isn't an achievable goal for them anymore because wages are so low.
Right. I've seen that a lot. Where I worked at DHMC, people retired and they came right back to work because they realized they couldn't live. So, how would you describe the current economy now in this part of the United States?
Well, let me try that one. A lot of people, Sharon, think of the economy as sort of like the weather, that it just sort of happens and that nobody really controls it and it's sort of a natural force. And so they think they don't have any power to change it. But that's not really the case. I mean, the economy is human created. It has rules and policies that are set in place by people. And those policies impact the way things happen. They impact who benefits, who doesn't benefit, who loses, who's left out. And it's really interesting to go back a while in history and take a look at how that has come to the present time. You know, if you go back to the Great Depression, people were really, really hurting. And so a lot of rules, a lot of policies were put in place that helped people. And we take it for granted now, but the beginning of Social Security was in the Depression. The beginning of unemployment insurance was in the Depression. The beginning of public works projects to put people to work was during the Depression. Labor unions were given powers that they hadn't had before. And some of the reckless practices of particularly the financial institutions and the stock market and so forth were reined in during the Depression. And so all of those policies shaped the economy that came after the Depression and particularly after World War II. And that led to a really golden time in our country during the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, where the middle class emerged as a really vibrant force in this country, and people, the American dream was alive and well. People could earn enough money and be assured of their job and receive health benefits and those kinds of things so that they could be looking upwardly mobile. They could send their kids to college when they had not been able to send their kids to college before. I mean, I remember my in-laws, my wife's parents from South Bend, Indiana. Her dad never graduated from high school, but he went to work for a corporation as an office boy, and gradually worked his way up through the ranks. And when he retired 50 years later, he was actually signing the checks for the dividends to the shareholders, to all the stockholders, shareholders of the company. And so along the way, he was able to buy a home and raise 3 kids and send those kids to college. And he also got his GED somewhere along the way. But I mean, this was sort of the typical American dream story of that age. And in those days, there was sort of a balancing of the competing dynamics of the economy. I think of it as sort of like an ecosystem. You had shareholders, of course. You had employees. You had customers. And you had communities. And those were sort of in balance. They competed for, you know, the generosity and the largesse of the corporation, but they were in balance.
Right.
But then something began to happen. You know, the system was in balance, but then things began to change.
So things were pretty good. I mean, I grew up then. I know my family moved ahead. And for the majority of people, I think we could say that. So we know things have gone south, and I wonder what happened, what caused that change?
Let me show you a chart. This chart shows from after World War II up until the current time what happened with productivity and what happened with wages. And this, of all the things we're going to talk about today, this is probably the most important. And this is the chart. Whenever I look at it, I get angry. And it's so we're going to spend a little bit of time on this chart.
I know this chart always makes me angry too.
So here you have productivity is increasing from the end of World War II as we came out of the World War II sort of pulled us out of the Great Depression, and productivity per worker is increasing sort of on a straight line, and wages followed that increase in productivity from the end of World War II up until the middle of the 1970s, and then something changed. Productivity continued to climb, as it always had, but wages flattened out. And so from the middle of the 1970s until now, the wages did not increase anywhere close to the increase in productivity. And this was the hollowing out of the middle class. So that's why we are where we are today, is because the gains that have come out of our economy stopped going to the workers. This ecosystem, this balance between workers and shareholders and communities and customers was out of balance. And this was not an accident. There were 2 things that happened in the 1970s. One was a notion of shareholder value took root. An economist by the name of Milton Friedman said, forget about employees, forget about communities, maybe even forget about your customers. Shareholders are the only stakeholder that matters. And so everything became focused on increasing shareholder value. And a couple of the things that we have seen since then, and I'll look at these quickly. One is that CEO pays, the pay to a CEO has gone up dramatically. I mean, back in the day, back in the 1960s and 70s, the average CEO of a corporation made about 20 times the average worker. Okay, I can understand that a CEO would be worth 20 times the average worker. Today, and ever since the early 2000s, it's 300 times.
More than.
Well, and it bounces around. It hit 376 in one year, and now it's down around 303. But 300 times? the average worker. So the gains have typically gone to the CEOs and the senior executives and the top 1%. And we've heard about all of that. But this has all started back in the 1970s with Milton Friedman and another gentleman by the name of Lewis Powell. The other thing that has happened is that the corporations and the financial interest have really spent heavily to keep those rules in the economy tilted in their direction. And you can see here what's happened on spending on political campaigns over the years. I mean, it has just exploded. And it doesn't matter whether it's Democrats or Republicans, spending on those campaigns has exploded because the moneyed interest really wanted to keep people in their side. And the other thing, and here's another chart that shows it, is what's happened to lobbying. I found a piece of data from 1952 that said the amount of lobbying spent in this country was $7.5 million, okay? Well, it reached over $3.5 billion in 2009, and it's close to $4 billion now. So the spending to keep things the way they are, tilted towards the moneyed class, has really helped keep workers down. So these are the this is what's been happening. This is why the economy is the way it is. Now, I don't want to say that no companies are paying their employees well. There are companies that have good paying jobs, that have good benefits, that have good retirement programs, that their employees make a living wage. There are companies right here in the Upper Valley that do that. I'm not going to name any for fear of leaving somebody out, but there are good companies. But then there are the companies that aren't paying good wages, that aren't doing benefits. There's a venture capitalist by the name of Nick Hanauer. He lives in Seattle, and he's written about this. And he talks about the real economy, which is the companies that pay good wages, good benefits, that the employees share in the productivity gains of the corporation. That's the real economy. And then he said there are other companies which he calls the parasite economy. And he said they pay minimum wage, no benefits, jerk their employees around with scheduling, and rely on public assistance, food stamps, Medicaid, welfare payments, to pay to their employees the things that they, the corporation, should be paying to those employees. So you've got those two kinds of companies. And the ones that we really care about changing are the latter. The good companies that are doing a good job by their employees, we're all for them. And we have them around us here in the Upper Valley, but it's the others that we're really trying to change.
Yeah. Wow. Blows me away. I mean, it's such a great analysis. Thank you so much. We know we've been hearing this for the last 9 months through the campaigning. CEOs are making out like bandits. Profits are through the roof. It's all about profit. And workers work and work and work with very little to show for it. And like you said, Leah, they have to go back to work. They have no way, with everything that they've got to live on, basic things, fundamental living things, childcare, rent, car, you name it, that they can't make ends meet. They've got to go back to work when they should be retiring. It's really very sad. I'm feeling a little hopeless.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to feel like this, but I do every day because I think about this a lot, and I know you do. How do we change this entrenched, profit-driven system?
Yeah, no, I feel that same hopelessness sometimes too. When you hear an analysis like the excellent analysis Rod just gave, it can feel like, wow, it's been 30, 40 years of accumulated oppression, an economy that doesn't work for everybody. So Is there any hope? But I think there was something else that Rod said at the beginning of his segment that I know I cling to, which is the economy is not like the weather. It's not inevitable. All these policies that were put in place to create this system can be undone, and new policies can be put back in place. We could reassert some of the things that built us up as an economy in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to create a brighter future for ourselves. And those policies were calling a moral economy, So, and they're common sense things. They're just basic things. It's nothing that's too fancy, or we're not asking too much. We're just asking for the basics so that people who work can really make a living, right? Can really carve out a wonderful life for themselves rather than one of just a cycle of work and sleep and struggle. And I'd love to run through sort of a quick list of the things that we sort of include in a moral economy.
Go for it.
Perfect. Okay. So at the top of our list is a wage that people can live on, right? So right now the minimum wages are really low. The federal minimum wage is $7.25, and that's just not enough to live on. A lot of people make the assumption that a minimum wage is for people who are in high school for their summer jobs, scooping ice cream, working at McDonald's, sweeping floors, but that's not the case. About 85% of the people who make a minimum wage are adults, right? They're working age adults. So we've got to make sure that that there's a living wage that's a minimum wage. Another is a protection from predatory lenders. We're seeing so many different types of lending that are exploitative in America. So in 2008, there was that big housing bust. A lot of that was because of really unfair lending. We're also seeing a lot of payday lending sweeping the country and increasing. So people who don't have access to banks are taking out loans at 300, 400, 500%. And you just can't come back from a loan with interest like that.
Right.
In New Hampshire, we
call that the debt trap.
We call it the debt trap, exactly. In New Hampshire, unfortunately, we have car title loans, which are 300% interest loans. And you use your car title as collateral, and Vermonters aren't safe from that. They can walk right across the bridge and grab a loan like that, and it just impacts the whole community. We're also talking about access to quality health care, right? Because something Rod mentioned, a lot of jobs don't offer good health benefits, which just means that we're seeing a dwindling of good health in America. So we're having workers who are poor, workers who are stressed, and workers who are unhealthy. We're also talking about access to quality education, right? We know that education is a key step in creating success in any family's life. So we want to make sure that everybody has access to quality education. We want to make sure that people have access to paid leave. This is another thing we're hearing tons of stories in Claremont where people have to make a decision.
Paid leave when they get sick.
When they get sick,
Yeah.
Thank you, yeah. So they get sick and they have to choose, do I stay home and possibly lose my job, or do I go into work and infect people? Or, my kid gets sick.
Right.
Do I go to work and have my kid go into school sick because I need the money to keep my kid safe and happy and healthy? Or do I take off work when I don't have paid sick time, possibly lose my job to take care of my kid? That's not a choice a parent should ever have to make.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, at the end, access to quality childcare. Childcare is so expensive, but you need it if you're going to work, right? So it's just workers we're finding are faced with such dilemmas, right? They have to choose between the welfare of their child, either because they're sick or because they need money. And that just isn't the kind of community I think America wants to create.
It's balancing food versus a roof over your head.
Exactly.
I mean, they're balancing things that should never even be up in the air.
No, it's an
all.
insane decision. As a mother, I hope I never have to be in that situation, and I don't know what I would do, but there are families who have to make decisions like this every week.
Right.
Every week they're balancing these really tough decisions.
And the predatory lenders, I just want to go back because
Sure.
the title lending that's happening around the country and right here and right nearby in Lebanon, when you put your title up for collateral at those interest rate and you're in that debt trap, you most likely will lose your car.
Yeah, the majority of people who take the loan lose their car. And then those who don't lose their car typically get to a certain point in the loan where they think, oh Lord, I'm about to lose my car. And then they go to family members and friends who are typically also not well off, borrow money. That money goes to the lenders, which goes to these corporations who don't reinvest in community, right? So it's not just stealing from sort of one person, but it's creating generational poverty in an area. And if you could imagine, we live in a rural area. I can't imagine how people live without a car. I mean, if you don't have a car, you don't have work. If you don't have work, you don't have a house. It's a very slippery slope to absolute poverty.
Yep, and this is the web. This is that web of life that's happening around us. Very scary.
So this list of what constitutes a moral economy that Leah went through, I mean, it's a very basic, common sense list, right? I mean, there's nothing fancy here.
No,
There's
this
nothing.
is all basic. You need, in order to live a dignified life, you need to be able to eat, have a roof over your head, have transportation, have health care, child care, and money to pay for it.
Right.
So, yeah, we've just fixed everything.
Right, now we just need those policies in place.
Yeah. So what I keep thinking about is, short of completely upending this entrenched structure, this is a structure that's been built since the 70s, as Rod has said, like a grid of inequality. What is the UVIP's top priority in tackling this?
No, great question. So one of the things in organizing that we prioritize is strategy. I just ran through a huge list of things that we would love to see come true tomorrow if we could. This afternoon, actually, would be lovely.
Before lunch would be
Before
good.
lunch would be perfect. But we know that if we run off in a million directions, our power will sort of be diluted. And so we're focusing on one particular policy to work on in the beginning, and that's really to enact a living wage. That we see as the root of helping people live and live well. And also because it's so unbalanced at the moment. So right now, the New Hampshire minimum wage is actually the federal minimum wage. And we've got a bit of a budget to run through with you just so you can see how the numbers align. That federal minimum wage is only $7.25. It's extremely low, and it's really impossible for people to live on that. So, for example, if we look at a budget of an adult who is raising 2 children, so a single parent with 2 children, they need about $58,000 to live just to pay the bills in New Hampshire. Again, that's not saving for retirement, that's not saving for college, that's just getting through the month. And if that's the case, then that one adult really needs to be making a wage of $28 an hour.
As compared to $7.25 as a minimum, which employers can legally do.
Which, yes, they can legally do. So typically a family like that will have to get assistance, right? Which is costly for taxpayers and is a point of dignity for a lot of families. They don't want to ask for charity. They don't want to ask for help. They want to work to be able to provide for their family, but the jobs who pay a living wage just aren't here in New Hampshire, not enough of them. There are some, like the companies Rod mentioned, but there's just not a proliferation of jobs that are good in the way that we really need them for a healthy community. If we look at sort of a typical nuclear family with 2 adults and 2 children, they need to be making $63,000, well, close to $64,000 a year for them, again, just to pay the bills. This is not saving, it's not creating a buffer of safety, financial safety, which would mean that each adult needs to be making over $15 an hour. So that's why we've set a living wage at $15 an hour. Looking at the nuclear family budget, that's really what we need in New Hampshire for all our families to be to be healthy.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to mention that the source of this budget, which is just a piece of a bigger budget that the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, put together a wage calculator, and it's not entirely correct, but they went region by region and they figured out how much it cost: food, childcare, medical, housing, transportation, and other things, and after taxes. And so they came up with this everybody's circumstances are different, we know that, but this is what they figured needs to happen. And it's pretty close.
And it really does shed some light on what it really costs to live.
Right.
People have a mistake of thinking that the minimum wage maybe is adequate to live on, and it just isn't. It just isn't.
Right.
And once we get rid of that notion that somehow the minimum wage is adequate to live on and start focusing on what is required to actually live, I think we can begin to make some progress.
Right. So we've talked, there's been a lot of talk around the country about minimum wage and their fight for 15, and fast food workers have made some inroads in that and won some fights that they've had. Where does the minimum wage fit into the moral economy?
Yeah, no, so I think there's this great momentum, there's a great urgency, there's a great desire for this minimum wage because frankly people need it, right? So people are getting out in the streets because they've gotten to a point where they just cannot live a dignified life with the money that they're making. So it's great that people are standing up, they're changing the weather, right? They're taking the power back, which is what America is built on, this idea that the people have control over creating sort of the economy and the political system that they deserve and that they want. So that's really exciting. I want to tell you just like a quick vignette of what it's like to live on the minimum wage. So UVAP has been doing work in Claremont since the very beginning of being founded in 2008. And right now we actually have an organizer who's dedicated to working in Claremont. She's a longtime Claremont resident. Her kids go to school there. She knows people from across the community. She's been interviewing them and having conversations with them about precisely these questions. What would you want to see in a moral economy? And I can't tell you the number of times where she and I have had a conversation where I just say, Trinity, so what are the stories that you're hearing this week? What stories have you heard? And again and again and again, I hear from Trinity these stories of this really common story of a parent who has one or two jobs. A lot of times parents have two jobs, and the mom might work a second shift, and then while the kids are at school, work a part-time job. Meanwhile, the dad is working third shift and also does some handyman work on the weekends. And because they can't afford childcare, even with 4 jobs, cobbling together 4 jobs, they might have grandma living with them, but they don't own their own home, so they're in an apartment. So they've got 3 adults and 2 or 3 kids in one apartment, 4 jobs. I mean, the parents just work constantly. They don't get to enjoy the kids. They can't invest. They can't, in their children's childhood, they can't sort of cultivate in them the values that they want to pass on. And meanwhile, grandma is watching them, which is great to have that family connection. But she's watching them and raising them as if, she's a mother all over again. She doesn't get to be grandma, she has to be mom again. So you see 3 generations living in the same apartment, cobbling together, multiple jobs just to make ends meet. And those are the people who are standing up and saying, we need a higher minimum wage, we need a living wage. But there are other reasons that the moral economy is so important, right? Not just these anecdotal stories, which actually make up the stories of so much of the tapestry of our community, but also it makes really good economic sense. So oftentimes people who haven't really studied it will think, oh, well, if we raise the minimum wage, won't that impact small businesses in a negative way? And that's actually not the case. So many small businesses are already paying their workers more than the minimum wage, and so increasing the minimum wage is something that they already have in their strategic business plan over the next several years. It's typically these larger corporations that Rod was talking about that are paying a really, really low wage and relying on the public then to provide taxpayer money for assistance to pick up the benefits that the workers need. But we have another sort of list that I'd love to show you that sort of highlights some of the ways that raising the minimum wage really makes sense economically. Right, so right now we've really hammered home this idea that the minimum wage is not a living wage, but if we raise the minimum wage so that people have a living wage, they can reinvest in the local economy, right? So when they have a little bit of extra money, they can go and be spenders, right? Whether that's a new refrigerator or out to a local restaurant or going on vacation here in New Hampshire and Vermont, we really rely on people going on vacation to help us build up our own economy. But if people can't afford to go on vacation, who's going to the ski slopes? Who's going leaf peeping? Only those wealthy CEOs are, but not sort of the general American public.
And when you've got those 4 jobs going, I remember hearing from one of those people that they had worked 21 days in a row without a day off.
Yeah.
So not only no money, but no time.
No rest.
No rest. No Sabbath, absolutely. The other thing that happens is when workers can earn more money and when they have access to jobs with good benefits, then they're no longer relying on welfare as a way of sort of filling in that gap, bridging that gap, allowing them to go grocery shopping, right? They're not relying on Medicaid as their only form of health care. Right. They're not only going to the emergency room when they absolutely have to, and it creates a healthier America. It also reduces the usage of these predatory loans that I was talking about, right? So if you can begin to build up some savings, when you need access to extra money, you have access to extra money because you've been saving it, as opposed to going and having to rely on a 300% interest rate. That's just, it's cruel, and we don't want our fellow community members to be doing that and losing their cars. Right. It impacts all of us. It tips the scale of this ecosystem that Rod was talking about. It becomes really unbalanced. Yeah. As I said, when people make more money, they're actually a lot healthier, and we all want a healthier community, right? So if they make more money, if we can invest in a higher minimum wage, that'll absolutely come to fruition. And the last piece, which can sometimes feel a little bit abstract, but I think is absolutely aligned with our notion of what American values are, is workers need to feel as though their work is dignified, right? I mean, can you imagine what it must feel like to work 40 hours a week and still feel like you've come up short? Right? There is so much shame associated with, I can't provide for my family. And it's not because they're doing anything wrong. Those workers aren't doing anything wrong. It's just the system is stacked against them. Mm-hmm. We really want an America, a New Hampshire, Vermont, where people feel like they have pride in their work and that they can come home at the end of the day and enjoy their children, invest in their local economy, because they have the money to do that, because their work has been dignified. And those aren't the kind of stories that we're hearing. We're hearing the absolute opposite.
One of the other things is that this is very popular with both individuals and amazingly with businesses.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, there've been certainly consumer surveys, all over the country, including the Northeast, that show that far and away people support raising the minimum wage. Why? For all the reasons that Leah was just talking about. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat or Independent, you still want, the majority of you want to raise the minimum wage. And one of the more surprising things is when you talk to businesses, a surprising number of businesses say, yes, it is good for our business to have a higher wage, partly because it makes our employees more loyal, partly because we don't have to train their replacements as often. There is this awakening in some quarters that higher wages make good business sense. I mean, there was some testimony in New Hampshire a couple of years ago when raising the minimum wage was being considered, and 30 small businesses showed up and said, yes, we believe in this because we know it's good for our business, because it's good for our employees, and that's good for our business. So the notion that individuals want it and businesses don't is breaking down. Yeah. And businesses increasingly are understanding that a raise in the minimum wage, paying your employees closer to a living wage, is good for business, not bad for business.
That's good news.
It's great, and particularly across businesses that are small and local that we love to support here in Vermont and New Hampshire. The ones that know that the money comes back to them, right? Exactly as Rod said. The ones that we take so much pride in,
Exactly. So what is the overall plan, what is the UVIP's plan in New Hampshire and Vermont? Like, what's already happening in this part of the country?
Yeah, so it's a really exciting time if you care about this topic to live in this area, because there are multiple coalitions that are growing that are taking the minimum wage issue head on. So that's exciting. And what we're really trying to do, again, is change this idea of the economy is inevitable into we have the power to take back the policies and sort of recreate what we want America to look like. And it starts here at home. It starts here in New Hampshire. It starts here in Vermont. And the techniques we're using are community organizing techniques. So that's really exciting. I'd love to just show you a list, too, of sort of who these coalition partners are, because I'm sure some of your viewers will recognize them. And if not, we're happy to introduce you to our coalitions and integrate you into the work, because the more people who integrate into the work, who do little pieces of work or big pieces of work, the greater likelihood that the minimum wage will raise. So in New Hampshire, we've got a great coalition that's brewing. We have a sister project called the Granite State Organizing Project that's mostly in the southern part of New Hampshire, who we're working with. We, of course, the United Valley Interfaith Project, are a part of the coalition. We're sort of the two founding members in New Hampshire. The Campaign for a Family-Friendly Economy is on board. New Hampshire Citizens Alliance is on board. American Friends Service Committee. They do great, incredible justice work, so of course they're right alongside us. Right. The Economic Justice Mission Group, the New Hampshire Conference of the United Church of Christ. So the faith communities are deeply involved because, again, they see this as an issue of equity and dignity. The New Hampshire Service Employees International Union, so SEIU, is involved in this, and the New Hampshire AFL-CIO. So we've got labor, we've got faith, we've got individual sort of secular citizens involved, we've got businesses involved. It's a really broad coalition because it makes so much sense to so many people.
You can just feel the power when you're meeting with all those folks.
Oh, it's amazing, yeah.
And Granite State Organizing Project had a big forum and invited politicians. And I felt, having worked in Vermont doing this work with the Vermont Workers Center, that I was so thrilled to be in New Hampshire doing the same work. I was just ecstatic.
Good.
Yeah.
You can cross the river anytime.
Yeah, I know. But this, like as you said, it's not isolated to New Hampshire, which is so exciting. The whole Northeast could really change. There's also a coalition in Vermont, and it's really led by the Vermont Interfaith Action Group, which is also a faith-based community organizing group that's in Burlington, Barre, Montpelier, Bennington, and they really have been doing some awesome statewide work with the clergy around a moral economy. Rights and Democracy is also a part of that group. Main Street Alliance, which represents businesses. A number of labor unions are being invited to the table, and of course we're going to be at that table too, because we work on both sides of the river, and we want a $15 minimum wage on both sides so that the states aren't competing for labor, but instead are creating a really holistic, strong economy across New Hampshire and Vermont. So as you can see, there are lots of organizations that are involved, but you don't have to be a member of an organization to really take part. There's also so many ways that individuals can take part. And if you're at home and thinking, so I'm looking at you, if you're at home and thinking, I don't have time for this, there's no space for this, I have no political background, I have no economic background, it's too hard for me, please just erase that thought from your mind, because there are so many small pieces of work that it will take to create a $15 minimum wage in both states, and you absolutely have the skills. So if you can talk, if you can make a phone call, if you have artistic talents, you absolutely can contribute to the movement.
So tell us how.
Okay, so here's how.
How can we get involved?
Yeah, so all across this late part of the summer and the fall, we will be having presentations across the Upper Valley, into New Hampshire, into Vermont, talking about the moral economy, much like this conversation we've had with you, because we want people to understand the economics and also understand their role in creating power for change. So if you want to go to that presentation, that's great. Get yourself educated. We need lots of educated citizenry to understand how the economy is currently not working for them and how they want the economy to work for them. Once you've gone to a presentation, tell a friend, educate them, right? It's all about keeping the knowledge spreading. We're also going to be making phone calls. So we'll be phone banking, talking to people. There's an election coming up in November, and we want people to go to the polls thinking about being really informed about the economy so that they choose the candidate that they think is going to best represent their views on the economy. That's so key. In democracy, voting is power. so we need people to be educated as they vote. We're also going to be knocking on doors, having these deeper conversations at people's doorstep, so that we're not relying on them just to come to a presentation or to watch the show. We're trying to get the message out as broadly as possible. So if you're an extrovert, door knocking is a great activity.
Actually, I'm an introvert and I enjoy door knocking.
There you
So
go.
it was.
Well, because from my experience, you really, when someone opens the door and they're willing to talk, the conversations that ensue are wonderful. And it's the one-on-one that you love to talk about is very moving and makes people feel like they're not alone, and that's important.
That's the essence of the door knocking we'll be doing is sharing stories.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, another way is share your story with your legislator. I mean, that's something that Vermonters and Granite Staters are so good at. We know our legislators. I can see my representative's house from my farm. Actually, we know her well. She'll absolutely
I ski with one of mine.
Well, there you go. See, you bump into them at
And the
the
other one
blow-up
belongs
all
to
the
my
time.
church.
Yeah, exactly. So share your moral economy story with your legislator. They need to know what's important to their constituents, and that's an easy and meaningful conversation to have. And you build a relationship with your legislators. We are so lucky in New Hampshire and Vermont to be able to do that easily.
Absolutely.
So we need to take advantage of that opportunity. Another piece is art. So UVIP has been doing a lot of creative art lately. So people with artistic talents, we want to get them all in the same room. Our actions, our demonstrations have been so much more creative in the last few months just because of all the amazing artistic creative energy that has sort of synced together. It's created an incredible synergy.
Yeah.
So calling all artists, get in touch with UVIP because we're also doing demonstrations monthly. And we're going to continue to do that, again, to cast this message of a fight for 15 is really important. A moral economy is absolutely essential for America's future. But we want to do it in a way that's irreverent or pointed or clever or cunning, and we need those artistic minds. So
One of my favorites on that, Leah, was recently a demonstration where we had people dressed up as the different low-wage jobs.
yeah, that was amazing.
And one person was dressed up as a cashier in a big box store, and then we had this image of the Fat Cat CEO, right? And then we had a thing that we learned that he or she was making $22,000 an hour.
An hour.
So the contrast
Yep.
between the $9.60 an hour and the $22,000 an hour
Very
for the
poignant.
CEO was, and it was all done with artwork.
Yeah.
It was
So you
fun.
may have seen us on the Ledger Bridge, in Claremont by Walmart, in Lebanon by Walmart, and we're going to be there every single week and month.
Right.
Yeah.
But the artwork has really made a difference.
Yeah, or like I just saw yesterday, we're putting out a moral economy adult coloring book, which is just so sweet and poignant. But you look at the amazing artwork, and it makes so much sense visually too. It just elicited from me just this because I just agreed with everything that I
Right.
was coloring.
Yep.
So we need everybody with their diversity of talents. There's space
right.
for everybody in this campaign. If you have 5 minutes, we want to use that 5 minutes. If you have 90 minutes a month, we want to use those 90 minutes. If you have one afternoon where you're willing to give 3 hours, we want that. There's time for everybody in their busy schedules to contribute.
So exciting.
It is
I
exciting.
feel energized.
Oh,
like
good.
just every time I talk to the two of you, I feel like we're going to make a difference.
I think so.
So-
Well, and the key is that individually we cannot make a difference.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Collectively we can. When we come together and work together, that's why the coalition is so important. That's why 5 minutes of your time and 30 minutes of your time and an hour of your time all put together, we can make a difference.
Right. We are powerful together.
Right.
Yeah. We are powerful. So how do people plug into this power? And I know you have some information that we're going to show the audience on how to plug in.
Absolutely. So if you're at home thinking about well, what could I do? I do have 5 minutes here, or I do know I have a week in August, or I do know that I could do Saturday mornings right before we go family grocery shopping. I could come to an action. If you're thinking about that, I want to encourage you to be in touch with, we're so lucky here in the Upper Valley and in Claremont and in the broader Upper Connecticut River Valley. We have two very talented organizers here, Trinity Dix and Kayla Dyer. So on the screen, we're going to flash their phone numbers and their email addresses. Please just contact them, because they will sit with you, meet with you, talk to you a little bit more about the moral economy if you have any questions, but also begin to brainstorm with you ways in which you're willing to invest your time. And then we will make sure that your time is invested wisely. So if you have those 5 minutes, we will use them. If you have that afternoon, we will find a way to use it. And that way we can be powerful together. You can make a difference individually, but if it's funneled through this infrastructure of community organizing, we create a larger impact together.
Right. And we're family friendly, right? Things that we do, the kids have a place. We've got grandchildren of some of our members who actually have fun making art. And remember that there is a place for everyone, the organization and the location. We can make it work. You can make it work. All these groups that we're involved with can make it work.
The other thing I wanted to say about that is call Trinity or call Kayla, not just if you're interested in UVIP, but if you're interested in this work. And we will make sure that if the right place for you to plug in is Vermont Interfaith Action, or the right place for you to plug in is Granite State Organizing Project, we'll make that connection.
Right.
So rather than you trying to, oh, there's a long list of organizations, how do I get a hold of all of them? No, just call us and we'll work that out.
Just call Trinity or Kayla.
We'll work that
that's what I was trying to say, that, not me, but all of these groups are working together because they see the value in the power of people.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the faith community has been leading for decades in a moral and a just and a humane world. And I think that this is a good closure. I mean, because I hope the next time that we meet, and we will, on this show, that this movement is the driving force in this country, and that it's spread. That's my dream, spreads through the country, and we work together to have a more just and humane society where people can live, work and live. And the living part is as important as the work part. It has to be balanced, as you said early on.
My hope is that the next time we meet is to interview us about, now that the law has been signed in New Hampshire and Vermont, raising the minimum wage to something approaching a living wage, how do we feel about that?
Yes.
And
what's
how do
next?
the people and what's next? That's my hope for the next time we get together.
And I hope it is a living wage or higher. That is my hope. Because we know that people need to live, and a wage gives them that ability. And so personally, anything less is not enough, but we're working on it. That's important.
Sign her up.
Yes, absolutely.
So
thank you so much.
Thank
Sharon.
Thank you for helping me make Voices for Justice be something valuable, and the work that you're doing is immensely valuable, and I appreciate knowing you and power to the people.
Thank you, Sharon. It's been a pleasure. It's been really a pleasure.
Thanks, Sharon, so much.